All right, fair warning. My goal here is to compact 20 years of lessons in 60 minutes. I guess it's really 84. Something every new reefer, every struggling reefer, and every mentor needs to see. If you're one of those people, hopefully you'll see it. Not everyone's going to like everything I like to say because I'm going to do it different than I normally do. Normally I lawyer the hell out of it and make sure everybody feels warm fuzzies about their way. Today I'm just going to share the way that I would do it because I think it's the most helpful and hopefully some of you will agree with it. Might just change the hobby for many. This is Perfect, The Enemy of Great, Part 2. We're at Reefapalooza, New York. Part 3 will be in California. Today we got an ugly baby. I'm not going to tell you what it is quite yet, but we have one. Yeah, wow is the word. We also have 9 core principles of reefing. I'm going to teach you how to solve that ugly baby. All right, so there's an elephant in the room here. Perfect is a misguided goal when virtually all of us fail in the first year. Like almost everyone who attempts a reef tank isn't here in 12 months, yet all of us for some reason on every forum are talking about all this perfection stuff. How do we get like the last little 10, percent out of it, yet almost all of our peers aren't here in a year. It's a kind of a misguided goal. And there is something special though about all of you. You guys are the 10% that made it through that gauntlet somehow. And there's some kind of magic that's in this room that we need to be able to stitch together so that we can hand it off to other people in the future generations. This is the ugly baby though. It's that there is 90% of the people that should be in this room aren't because they're not able to do this. They spent thousands of dollars in a year of their time and they failed. And you know what? We don't like talking about it. We don't like thinking about it. We don't like seeing it. But we're going to do it anyway today for just a little bit because our goal here is actually for 80% of people. That'd be like 8 times the amount of success rates that we could achieve if we did this. And that's the goal, and I think it's absolutely possible. So the first thing you gotta look for is like, what are the causes of those things? The first one would be like a tank just crashes, everything dies. I actually think this is probably the #1 belief that's happening, but I actually think it's the rarity. Like this is probably not the #1 cause. It's probably more stuff like this. The tank just was filled with algae and slimes. It looks like crap and I'm gonna take it out of my house because it's just not doing what I want. But also this one right here. Yeah, stuff's kind of living, but I'm not really achieving the dream. I had a dream when I set out to do this and this just isn't it. So ultimately the juice just isn't worth the squeeze and I'm gonna move on. And then ultimately sometimes the wallet catches up with us too. I just get sick of spending money, dollar after dollar after dollar trying to solve these problems and I'm not getting there. Good news here though, is information solves that one. Information solves the algae too. Information solves not missing the dream and even information will solve the money problem too. So what we have here really is an information problem. It's not a skill problem. Because skill, like anybody here happy with this tank if you produced that for your first time? I think that most people would. All right, it's just 2 parts, water changes, there's 0 mechanical filtration, I didn't buy any ozone, there's no UV sterilizers, there's no nothing, man. Just a box of water, you did some water changes on. It's got 2 power heads, seeded microbiome. And good news, there's like a video out there, a whole series of them how to do it. It's called the WWC Hybrid Series. And it has some successes and some lessons learned. So if you watch the end, a couple of tweaks at the end too that we would do differently to get even better results. Good news. It's not a money problem either because this is bulk 2-part. This is like the cheapest possible way to do chemicals. There's 0 mechanical filtration. I didn't buy any fancy gear. It's a bucket of salt every year. Whoops, too fast. Bucket of salt every year, 2 gyres, dealer's choice. I got a T5 hybrid, the oldest technology that's super cheap. Microbiome from used rock and low cost growing coral. This isn't a money problem. This is the cheapest possible way to do this. What it is an information problem. So the problem with the information that we have, and I know this because I'm curious if you guys went through this, but I go to a forum, there's all kinds of different answers there. I'm asking a question, I get all kinds of different answers. You can go to YouTube, we all conflict with each other as too. You go to your social media, you go to Facebook group or Instagram, we all conflict with each other. There's so much information. You go to a fish store, the fish store it conflicts with the information. And then even I can go to books like Julian and Charles Deke's Reef Aquarium. This is probably the best of all those options up there, but these things conflict with all this stuff too. And I'm having an anxiety attack right now thinking about which one of these people do I possibly listen to, and then how do I fit it all together? Because a lot of this stuff is just general info. This isn't like a how to set up an aquarium. It's like this sea of like overwhelming amounts of little bits of information that somehow we're supposed to stitch together. And sometimes it reminds me of like a puzzle, except for this puzzle is like one of those black ones, you know, where there's like no reference point. I'm just trying to put all this stuff together and it's gonna take me forever. Hopefully I get it right. And there's noise too, man. There's so many cooks in this kitchen. You know, everywhere we go, there's just so much information coming from this way, that way. This way's the best, that way's the best. How do you possibly know through all of that? And then when the information doesn't work, and I had one of those problems, I ended up with 90%, you know, was it the information? Was it me? You know, or was it just bad luck? And the answer is I don't really know, but I think it was the information in the vast majority of those cases. As long as you listen to the information, you probably would succeed. I got news for you. I'm part of this problem. Because all of this information that I've been sharing since 2008, I guess it is, you know, 2006, and 2,000 videos that I shared, man, it's choose your own adventure stuff. It's all series that are designed to be choose your own adventure. But you know what, man, that's how I learned too. You know, one of my big things I learned from that Julian book, dude, it was like what a skimmer is, you know, what carbon dosing is, what all these things are. And then you just got to kind of piece it together later on. But also, I mean, we're all human. We don't really want to be told what to do. And I know that as an educator, you just want to hear it all and like go off and do your way. But sometimes it's time to just step outside that comfort zone and just share the way to do it. So I'm going to do that today. And because this isn't working for us, and it isn't recent or fresh, man, we've been having this problem for decades. I went to go look at other industries and other hobbies to see how do they get past this exact same problem. And what I found is there's a difference between complex and difficult. Everybody in this room would say that reefing's hard. But I think hidden inside there is a difference between complex and difficult. I'll tell you in a second. And the initial success was found through a focus on direct how-tos in those industries rather than just general knowledge and choose your own adventure. Get into that in a second too. But complex, anybody feel like this tank was complex?
I feel.
Yeah, because I could, it's hard, man. You know why? Because I've spent hundreds of hours playing this tank, piecing together the puzzle to do this. I had endless conversations with WWC and how we were going to build this system. And then there was hundreds of hours afterward. But you know what makes it different? Is there's baseline knowledge required. I went into WWC, we got some baseline knowledge, and good application was certainly required. But this is what's different, is the first attempt success was possible. If you got the right information and you applied it in the right way, you could actually do this on your very first attempt. Now you'd have to actually listen to that information, which is really hard. That's the hard part. But this, man, is also what's different here is actually all those hobbies are similar to this. You know, it's food science, it's hydroponics, and home brewing. All these things, same thing, baseline knowledge, good application, and first attempt, I could actually do this. This thing, man, I could never do on my first attempt. That, man, is difficult. And what that required is I probably had to start skiing, you know, when I was a young child and learn, you know, all kinds of base skills, one after another, to be able to do the, like, whatever that, you know, trick name is, I don't know. But, you know, it's near perfect application, because if I don't land there, if I don't do it perfect, I'm going to eat a face full of snow as well. And the first attempt always fails. Every single time that somebody tried that for the first time, they ate a mouthful of snow, for sure. You know, and that's the difference. And I say this because that should be encouraging to us that, man, that means that it doesn't have to actually be hard. It's just as complex, and just an information problem and following it is all we really need to do. But is a reef tank more complex than those things? Because, you know, I talked to some of my peers about this and they would say yes. But the difference here really is to master this, it's debatable. All of these things are a lifetime pursuit if you really wanted to master them. But to start, absolutely. I think reefing is way, way harder than all of those things. But that really only reinforces the need for some agreed upon information that all the community supports. Doesn't mean that we don't need it. If it's harder, we need that plus some. We need extra. All right, so a first year initial success. The reason that these things are all successful, the reason that I can make a rack of ribs day one is because my buddy told me to go get Meathead's book. I made the rack ribs out of there, followed instructions, I was able to produce the result. The reason that I could probably do that hydroponic thing is because I went up and I researched it, and basically everybody in the community said, go read this book. And it isn't a general knowledge book, it's how to design and build an inexpensive system for growing plants in water. How to. It's really easy. You know what? Amazon told me it was #1 too because it had the most ratings and there was 4.5 stars. And for $15, I got all the information I need to be able to do this project. It was that easy. right? Home brewing too. They give me a kit, they give me instructions, and never in a million years would I think deviating from those instructions. It says use, yeast. I wouldn't just say, I don't want to feel like doing yeast. That's for fools, man. They never do that. Follow it. The hard part is resisting that temptation to tinker on the first attempt. That really is the hard part of this is, resisting. And I talked to a lot of people like, this is my hobby. I want to enjoy it. Like, the hobby isn't what protein skimmer you use. It's the beauty that you create inside that box, man. Because each one of these tanks are all unique butterflies and all cool in totally different ways. It isn't what you open the cabinet and how many filter socks you use and what micron you use. That's silly. All right. But the best comparison I found here is actually this book, Food Labs. And it's better cooking through science. This not only made me a better cook, but it made me a better reefer, and it made me a better educator as well. And one of the things that he would say in the front of this, and part of their inspiration for creating the book, is despite 100 years of believing that searing meat before roasting locks in juices, it does not. But how does he know that that is false? And the answer is, after millions and millions of steaks have been cooked over a course of 150 years, somebody came along, they seared it, and they flipped it over and they said, dude, there's juicing coming out the top. It was that easy, man. And then for some reason, on the other hundreds of millions of steaks, nobody else noticed. Like somehow we didn't figure that out, but that's just that easy. So I look at this as better reefing through science. Ever since I started this, people have been telling me that cyano is caused by high nutrients. You know how I know that that's garbage and it's just not true? Same way, because I have seen like thousands and thousands of tanks with high nutrients that don't have cyano. I've also seen thousands of tanks that have tried to beat cyano by lowering nutrients. Not a single one of them have worked. Dude, that is just not the truth of it. There's something more complex happening here. But I also heard early on for many of my early years of reefing, corals don't require food. How do I know that's false? Well, I went and read all of Dana Ritta's articles about nutrition of a coral. You know what? Turns out they have a mouth. We saw it. Everybody knows this. Somehow they didn't think they have actual need for food. But then we went and did the experiments on it. We found out for sure it absolutely does require food. Refugiums need to be huge to work. That was the message. It needs like half the size of your tank. Turns out I did an experiment. We didn't believe that. Wasn't true. pH doesn't matter. How do I know that? Because every marine biologist in the universe would tell you that it absolutely matters. We did the experiments. We found out that's not true. Shadows don't matter. How do I know that's false? Same steak methodology, man. Looked at it, dude. One of these is getting way more photons than the other one. I can see it with the naked eye. The photons are turning light energy into chemical energy called glucose or sugar. Which one of those is producing more sugar? I can see it with the naked eye. Turns out I can measure it too. And I can get a par meter out there, and the one that doesn't have a shadow is hitting 4 times as many photons. It's producing 4 times as much sugar and chemical energy. And even the one that's in a little tiny secondary shadow is half. Yeah, I can see it. It's super easy. One of the things that he would say, the author of this book, is the first step to winning is learning how not to fail, but he adds color to this that I really like. If you're a tinkerer in the kitchen, you like to modify recipes a bit here and there to suit your own taste or mood, which is every single person in this room probably, including me, that's all well and good, and luckily the first 6 times your modifications didn't affect the outcome of that recipe. What changed the 7th time? And for anybody who's been watching me for a while, somewhere around the 7th time, man, I produced a tank called the 360, and that thing didn't go well for me. I had problems in the beginning of it. And what I did is I wanted to find out why not this time. So we set up 12 tanks to find out why. Let's learn how not to fail. I want to know what went wrong, not just for me, but for all of you, because you guys are all trying to figure this out. All right. And then, once you understand the basics of the science and why a recipe works, you suddenly find that you freed yourself from the shackles of recipes. You can modify as you see fit, fully confident the outcome will be a success. That guy looks like he has been freed from the shackles of cooking, and I want to look like that when I'm reefing, right? Yeah, you just learned something new. And so you know what? Once I understood the science behind the ugly stage, I was able to produce a solution that you'll hear today that worked for me 7 out of 7 times. This problem won't happen for me ever again, and hopefully it won't happen for anybody in this room and anybody else that you might encounter as well. And he says, this is my favorite part actually, he says, why trust me? And he says, don't trust me. The just trust me is the way of old cooks, the MO of master-apprentice relationship. Do what I say and do it now because I say so. And that's exactly the mentality that we're trying to fight here. I want you to be skeptical. Science is built on skepticism. Go take the things that register with you and go and try them and learn something new. That's what we're trying to do. So that is the point here. Can we realize this message? Can we use what we learned from those industries and produce a path that produces success for 8 times as many people as today? 80% succeeding instead of 10. And I think it is possible because I've seen it in really simple tanks like this. If people followed exactly what we did there, they would probably be able to replicate it. And the first of the 9 core principles that I'm going to teach you is the cost barrier. And I never talk about cost here because it's like a taboo conversation. Like everybody doesn't really like this conversation. But is it real? Do we all empty our wallets in this thing? This means that we do have to discuss it. We have to find ways to do this more economically. And reefing just really isn't cheap. Pretending otherwise is a disservice to the animals and yourself. There absolutely are cheaper ways to do this. I mean, we're like taking a little piece of Fiji, we're bringing it our home, we're caring for all these animals that are a really foreign environment in Minnesota. Of course, it's going to have a cost, but the right tool gently used is better than an inferior tool. So when I'm trying to figure out what tool that I want to use to solve a problem in my tank, I could go get a gently used one for a small fraction of the cost of a brand new one, and I would much rather have the right tool with a little bit of use on it than a brand new one that doesn't work for what I want it to do. All right, tanks can be free. I was shocked. I knew that they were really cheap, but I went to Facebook and I found out that most of them are free. These things are hard to get rid of, and people will just let you come and pick them up out of your house instead of buying them. So it's a great way to save some money. Used setups, man, 80% off. $500, man. I bet you that person's got 4 or 5 grand into this thing. $500, you want to get this, on a budget? This is the way to do it. The gear's half off. These 2 Kessels, they've been used for 1 month. They'd be over $1,000, but instead they're over half off, gently used. I could have got $250 lights, or I could get the ones that I wanted, and this probably applies to basically any light out there. But also, sumpless tanks rein in a lot of costs. And it could be this 40-gallon breeder that seems like it's always on sale at Petco, or it could also be like an all-in-one tank. But what it does is it just kind of naturally inhibits me from buying all this gear. I don't have a sump with like a hole in it just saying, fill me. I want to put stuff in there. It's just like it's just part of the whole thing. And so what it does is I just can't really put all that much stuff on there. I can just do water changes and be fine. And that's the reality of it, is water changes can replace the gear. You can have a little bit of debate of the cost of the gear over the salt, but in the first year, or even probably first couple, a bucket of salt, man, is way, way cheaper than a protein skimmer. End of story. All right. And the worth it is really just a moving target. There will be some things on the tank where you really like and you really want to do, and you'll execute on those things and you'll move budgets from some things to others. But the end is a limited amount of gently used gear is how to reef on a budget. Now you can go out and have a bunch of different debates anyway. If anybody asks me how do I do this and save some money because I don't want to dump my wallet, this is how I would say it. All right, the biome cycle. So this is how we're going to cycle a tank. They're not talking about nitrate or nitrate and ammonia and all that stuff. I'm just talking about how to get this tank up and running, looking beautiful day 1, and keep it that way so we're not running this prolonged ugly stage all the time. So the ugly stage is a visual result of a microscopic battle gone wrong. Down in there is like 8 million little organisms fighting each other, and what you really want to do is make sure they're fighting each other perpetually and nobody ever wins. When somebody wins, it looks like this. All right. The microbiome can be influenced but not guaranteed. I can add some copepods and I can try to get them to eat all of the diatoms in there. There's a really good chance that that's going to work, but for some reason it doesn't always work. Why? I don't know. But 80% of the time it will probably work. We can influence these things, but you can't guarantee it. And so that's just important to think when we hear all of these things from different people, kind of hear the numbers of it. How many people this seems to work for and how many people doesn't it work for. PAR level has a big influence on the outcome as well. So PAR, and this is one of the things that's really obvious after the fact for me, which is the PAR level of the tank drives whether or not it's going to be successful, because I've had 8 million Insta LPS tanks. And I just thought that it was so easy to set up these tanks. But it turns out that all the scavengers in there grow at about the same rate as the things that are under about 100 PAR in the photosynthetics. But if I scale up the PAR, also those photosynthetic algae and slimes, man, are tripling their rate. and they're way outpacing all of the scavengers. And so in an SPS tank, it's much more difficult. And the biome in a container puzzle has the highest success rates in those low to medium par tanks for that reason. So you've seen me do this in many of the tanks where we're like, trying to replicate the ocean, by piecing all the little missing pieces of the ocean back into this thing. And it does avoid some of the parasites and the uglies doing this way, but to be honest, it's a little bit of a mess trying to do this, and it doesn't always work. Definitely works in lower par tanks than higher par tanks. But microbiome solutions from the ocean are effortless, and I wanted to write the word best here, but I thought I'd get roasted, but I really do think that it's the best, and that's harsh, man, because, it comes with the good and the bad and the ugly. I'm just gonna say it's okay. I'm gonna take that ugly in the end and the bad, and I'm gonna learn how to, manage all of those things, and most of them can be managed. And when it's done right, the ugly stage doesn't exist or short. This is an example, what this tank looks like after a few weeks. It's not growing anything funky in it. And all these things that are in here, some of them, again, are good. Some of them are bad, totally natural. All this stuff came in the ocean. They fight each other in the ocean. And it's all about finding balance. Like once you get a microscope in your tank, you see a whole new world in your tank you didn't even know existed in there. And this is what it looks like when it's gone wrong. And I think that those are actually dinos, those little balls that are spinning around over there. If the ugly stage is prolonged, the tank is telling you that the conditions are right for a specific organism to win. We just got to fix that. And it might be a pest you introduced, or more likely a natural predator that you didn't. So sometimes people would think, oh, how did I introduce these dinos? I think it's likely that you probably have those things, everybody in this room, from some source of, the sand, the rock, whatever, coral. You have all this stuff in there. What we probably don't have, for whatever reason, is the predator that eats it, or whatever it is that keeps these things in balance. Sometimes it's bad luck. So this is my solution to this problem. It's called sand cycling. And when I say my solution, I don't mean that I'm the first one that's ever done this and it's like stamping my name on it. I just mean that this is what I would do. So apply that statement when I say my solution from here on out. Why sand cycling? And I'm saying sand cycling rather than rock, because rock is the #1 way that you've heard, live rock, right? Well, because sand has more scavenging organisms and bacteria. There are up to 100,000 microorganisms from thousands of different species on per grain of sand, right? The sand has more stuff on it than the rock. Sand also has fewer types of photosynthetic pests and uglies. So the sand's turning over, so it's not gonna have all this algae and stuff growing on it, right? And in those little grains and all those little nooks and cracks is where all the bacteria and all this stuff are, living in there, and they're creating, their habitat. And there's even stratified layers of different things that live in there. It's also affordable and readily available. Live rock really is kind of hard to find, and really good live rock anyway, and it's super duper expensive. You can spend $2,000 on it, live rock for a 100-gallon tank, easy. This stuff's $52. At $52, I could solve the biome problem in my tank. It's readily available and easy to get. And the same source of sand provides more consistent results. So virtually, if I got 100 people that went over this TBS and picked up their sand, those 100 people would probably have very similar results if they executed it the same way. But if I say generic terms like live rock, well, live rock could be, something shipped out of Indonesia, it could be Australia, it could be on a boat from Fiji, sat there with some wet newspaper for 2 months. It could be somebody took some rock at a fish store, dropped it in with some other live rock, sat there for 3 weeks. Those are all gonna produce totally different results. So I like this one because if you're gonna do a recipe, it means that it needs to be replicable. It needs to produce the same result for everybody that goes ahead and does this. And I like the look of Gulf sand now. Originally, I liked that duney look, like oolite and stuff, but it never really looks like that because it's blown all over the place. And if it isn't blown all over the place, often it's growing cyano because it's getting all these organics and stuff because we're not blowing it off of it, And it ultimately has these, areas in it that I'm just not happy with. This stuff, actually, last time that Dave and I went to Hawaii, we looked our face down in there, and you know what, man? Down there, what you see is these little crumbles of sand because the waves are breaking the corals and the parrotfish are crunching them all up. This is what you see. And now that I know that and I've recognized it, I actually like seeing this in my tank as well, and it doesn't blow around from my SPS corals, which is great. And better yet, it worked on 7 out of 7 tanks for me. Now, the first couple where SPS tanks were used, the live rock from Tampa Bay combined with the sand. Interesting part is these are the ones that actually had the worst ugly cycle, because the stuff was growing on all the organics on the rock. and had photosynthetics on the rock, right? But by worst, ugly cycle, what I mean is it got some slime, we turned off the lights for a week, we turned them back on, dude, and we're off to the races. 1 week ugly cycle is like what it should be. That should be the standard for all of this, right? And then these ones were tanks that just had dry rock, but 100% of this Gulf live sand. You know, real live sand come out of the Gulf of Mexico. And you know what? These ones just didn't skip a beat. The biome in these tanks spread all over the surface, but they didn't have all the photosynthetics all over the rock. Effortless, right? And then these ones are even simpler. These are the lower light tanks, like the LPS tanks. And you know what these ones did? We mixed 15%, maybe 20% of the Gulf of Mexico sand in with your like standard ocean direct sand. Dry rock, didn't skip a beat. Same result. A couple of them showed a little bit of slime, man. Turn the lights off for a week. We're good to go. You know, just set back those things, give the scavenging items a chance. And that's why I like all of these options, because they actually worked. All right, so there's an actual recipe here, and this is what I'm gonna tell you. On an LPS and softy tank, use 20% live Gulf of Mexico sand, ocean direct sand for the rest. SPS tank, use 100% live Gulf of Mexico sand or air cargo. On an SPS tank, the stuff just matters a lot more. So you can air cargo it in, they'll ship it from airport to airport, just go pick it up at your airport. This is as fresh as it possibly gets, saves on some shipping, actually it's cheaper. Add some pods. This actually might be redundant. I believe there's actually pods inside that sand and you don't actually need these things, but here's the problem. In the recipe where I did this 7 out of 7 times, we use pods. So I can't tell you that it's not part of this. Maybe somebody else will go out and try and prove this wrong and we'll learn something new. But as I sit here today, these are part of the recipe that we applied. 4 weeks of ambient light only. So like don't black the tank out, just don't turn the lights on the tank. Let all this stuff like, you know, figure out its, you know, methodology in there and spread around and, you know, fight each other and just kind of stabilize. And then meanwhile, some of the coralline algae and stuff is still getting light from the room, which is adequate to keep it alive. And a lot of the photosynthetics you want will be staying there. At that point, do a 50% water change, 2 weeks of 50% par goal with your utilitarian fish. When I say 50% par goal, I don't mean turn your lights to 50% or whatever they are. I mean, whatever your goal was, you're gonna set it at, put it at half that, utilitarian fish. And the water change, if you test nitrate and phosphate and it's really low, skip the water change. If it's really high, maybe you need to do more. But the point is, don't start a brand new tank, turn the lights on when the nutrients are super high in this tank. That's a bad move. All right, off to the races now. Now you're gonna have success, and for whatever reason, man, light is the reset button if you need it. There's a whole lot of photosynthetic energy that's coming out of the top of that thing, and it's fueling uglies. If you run into uglies, just reset the button, man. It's that easy. And you know what? Tinker with this at your own risk. It may change the outcome. And that's the hard part, because there's something in here, like, I don't know, like I listen to most of that. I'm gonna go do a couple of the things. The pod is a good option, or, you know, good point on this. I might not do pods. I don't know, that water change kind of seems like a pain in the butt. I don't wanna do that, or I don't wanna test. Well, I don't really know the outcome. That's your way, and I only really know how to teach my way, and this way I know works. All right, so coral nutrition, next. Just to tell you, everything I know about coral nutrition I learned from this guy. The best thing that you could probably do is go read the 6-part articles that he has on coral nutrition. They're awesome. Also, what I learned is from the WWC team. So I learned from Victor and Josh how they apply this knowledge to saving animals inside of their facility. Taught me this quite a few years ago. They brought corals back to life, they color them up. So my mentors are telling me this as well. And then on top of that, we're doing experiments to confirm it, because I'm skeptical and I just want to know for myself, right? Turns out, you know the coral skeleton is calcium and alkalinity, right? Well, coral tissue is 50% protein, amino acids, 30% lipids and fatty acids, and 17% carbohydrates and minerals. Where does that stuff come from? It doesn't come from my 2-part, right? Where is it coming from? And the good news is the coral can actually produce most of it, and I'll show you a little bit of how. Amino acids and fatty acids are the building blocks of proteins, lipids, and tissue. So if you think about like a protein, the tissue of the animal, well, that's built up of tissue, it's built up of protein. The protein's assembled out of amino acids. To give you an idea how complex this is, that is the amino acid found in red fluorescent protein. Yeah, dude, there's like a couple dozen of them. Yeah, this is a complex subject. You know what? And corals can synthesize most of these things. If you look at this little chart here, the top of it is glucose, which is just basically sugar. And these amazing little animals can transfer all of that stuff and turn it into a vast majority of the amino acids they need to build protein. but they can't do it with the essential ones. The essential ones are the ones that they cannot produce themselves, and they need to acquire this from the environment outside of that. So they normally would do it from capturing prey or adsorbing or capturing the amino acids in the water. So when it's done right, the corals look like this. The coral tissue keeps up with the skeletal growth, looks healthy and colorful. That is what we want. I mean, that looks like awesome coral to me. It's at least what I want. But it's going wrong. The coral tissue looks weak, thin, pale, or receding. The coral's telling you that it's having problems with metabolic processes and tissue production. Now you could see that coral and you could say that, hey man, there's a lot of things that could be wrong with that. It could be stuff that's in the water, it could be some toxin, it could be the lights are too bright, it's bleaching it. But you know how I know that it's actually nutrition? It's because we ran an experiment. We ran coral amino on a whole bunch of corals in these tanks. We added nutrition and it turned into that one. The thing that changed wasn't light or some contaminant in the water. The thing that changed is we added nutrition. And these things were nutritionally light because we only had a couple of fish in these experiment tanks with all these corals. And it wasn't just this one, it was this one too. And what the WWC team would tell me and Josh is eating coral is a healthy coral. So if you can't see their mouth and they're just basically surviving, trying to hold on, it's not healthy. That one over there has got its tissue back, it's got polyps out. This one, also, same. These are all from the same experiment. And so what we're seeing here is we add in the amino acids and lo and behold, it can build its tissue. You know what? We can see it with our acros too. And we're not only gonna build the tissue, we're gonna build the fluorescent proteins too, because we don't just want them to live, we want them to look cool too, right? And it's just that easy. I think this bottle of amino acids is like 15 bucks. Super, super easy. All right, so this is my solution to this, which is how to spot deficiencies. Know how to solve the deficiency or spot deficiencies and don't solve non-existent problems. So if the coral looks like that at the top, there's a lot of different things it could be, but if you know that you think the tank is nutritionally deficient, go buy the bottle of coral meal and find out. It should look like that. But if it looks like that already, don't go running out buying a bunch of amino acids and elixirs and stuff because your tank already looks good. It's probably because you're feeding it right. You got a bunch of fish and stuff in it already. So know how to spot it and don't solve problems that don't exist. But also don't starve your fish. So where do a bunch of those essential amino acids I talked about, the ones that can't synthesize, come from? Well, it comes from this. It's protein, And so you're feeding these PE mysis, and it's going to eat it, and then the fish has a really poor digestive tract, so it just kind of lets it all out, And that's what, if you watch in the wild, that's what's happening. Is all these schools of fish are going all over the corals, and they're just eating all kinds of stuff, and they're pooing all over them. And it sounds gross, but that's actually what they're getting most of their nutrition from. And it's kind of how we grow food here too. Manure grows corn. Just the way that we do it. The nitrogen feeds all these animals. If I would tell you right now, I really like the PE mysis just because it's really low in phosphorus. If you have a phosphate problem, this is probably a good option. Filter socks and felt are tools, not requirements. So like, dude, if you don't have a nitrate and phosphate problem, don't use this filter socks and the felt. You're just pulling all the food out of the tank. The only reason you do this is because you actually have a nutritive pollution tank in your tank. And amino acids as needed. Just to bring this really home here, this is called carrier-mediated transport. So in the tissue of this animal is a little teeny pocket called a carrier. And what it does is it uses its metabolic energy to electrically charge this little carrier to attract amino acids into it. It's using its own energy for this. When they land in there, it closes and then uses energy to release it inside of its body. It's biologically designed to do this. So, of course, this came from Dana Riddle, by the way. And amino acids needed. Particulate organic matter, too. So they're capturing all the little poo particles. There's not many of those things in a reef tank in many cases. So reef roids, reef chili, reef blizzard. Reef blizzard's unique in the essence that it tells you, one of them's for SPS, one's for sponges, one's for clams. But you know what? The ones that I use mostly is reef roids and reef chili, just because the University of Hawaii did a study on this and found that those two actually grew coral better than most. In fact, the filtered seawater, once they filtered all the stuff out of it, one of the corals had negative growth. These ones did not. They were growing all three of them, both the reef chili and reef roids, and that's why I'd use that one. But most importantly, take before and after photos. Because surprisingly or not, at that amino acid, you saw a pretty stark difference in all those corals. When we saw it in real time, we're like, I don't know, it looks a little better, I think. Right? My memory just of how bad it was not that good, and I wasn't the only one. Everybody there was like, I think it looks better. Then, Dave was nice enough to get all the photos back out, and we looked at it and we're like, holy cow, that was a difference. That's the best $15 I ever spent. And I'll continue. But more to the point, even beyond that, is what if it didn't work? Well, I don't need to waste 15 bucks. I don't need to waste that 15 bucks. I don't need to go through the time of dosing it. So part of it is when you share information with the others, when you have these before and after photos, it's so much more compelling than, I don't know, I think it worked. It's compelling to you and compelling to everybody you talk to. And note that nitrogen or nitrate and phosphate is feeding zooxanthellae and algae. So some people are trying to feed their corals nitrate and phosphate, and it absolutely works, right? But there is a difference here. Those things feed the zooxanthellae and algae in your tank. Amino acids and fatty acids feed the coral directly. So what happens when I increase the nitrate and phosphate in the tank? Well, I'm feeding the zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae will then go on to produce more glucose and then produce more amino acids. Not the essential ones, but more of the other ones. But also I'm feeding the algae inside the coral, which means I'm also feeding algae inside the tank as well. If you don't have an algae problem, maybe it doesn't matter. If you do, it certainly matters. But the amino and fatty acids are feeding the coral biology directly, and more similar to what it would have in the ocean as well. Note that if you overfeed these things, it will definitely turn into nitrate and phosphate, and you end up in the same place anyway. All right, fish nutrition. All right, those that evolved to eat fiber and carbohydrates do better when you feed these foods. All right, so these are the fish that eat algae, which is largely fiber and carbohydrates. And what does do better mean? It means instead of living like 2 years where you thought you were winning, like then, I don't know, out of nowhere, 2 years in, 3 years in, it just kicks the bucket, and you think that maybe it's the evil in the tank, which is, a goofball thing. There's something in here that we did wrong. The animal didn't just die out of nowhere. It's not old age here. And so when you feed these things, they just do better, and they can live out their entire lifespan, natural lifespan in your tank. Those that evolved to eat protein and fats do better when you feed these foods. Proteins and fats. Turns out that's really easy because we all feed shrimp and stuff, so you're not going to have to think about that a whole lot. But how often you feed is as important as what you feed. Think caloric intake. So a fish that just sits there and like perches on the rock has a total different calorie burn than a fish that's like swimming around all over the place, burning calories all day long. And you're just going to starve it to death if you don't feed it. And that's like one of the ancient things. Like when I started this hobby, people were like, you only feed 1 cube, every other day. And some people are like, once a week they can survive. This is the natural amount they feed on. That is the most goofball thing I've ever heard, because you're not even thinking about the biology of all of these animals. Now there's some of them that's true. That's certainly not true of all of them. And back then we were trying to fight nutrients and algae. We don't do that anymore. All right, so when it is done right, the fish lives out its entire potential lifespan in your care. That is absolutely possible, that these animals can live, 10, 5, 10, 20 years inside of your tank if you do the things that, just care for it, basic stuff. And that's my goal. Certainly hope that it's all of your guys' goal. We don't want to kill these things prematurely. All right, but when it's going wrong, high energy fish die and, dwindle from low caloric intake. Herbivorous fish dwindle from constipation. I actually laughed the first time that Elliot told me that, that constipation is actually the biggest killer. But this fish is designed, man, to have high fiber all day long. It's been doing this for a millennia. And then when you change it to just fat and protein, it just gets constipated and it dies. And it turns out I would find this in terrestrial animals as well. So if you take a rabbit which only eats grass and you feed it just protein and a fat, it also gets effectively constipation and dies. There's an actual name for it. So this is like just known science and biology about animals. All right, and nutritionally specific fish like literally get the worst of it. Like a mandarin, if you don't find it, the copepods and provide the right environment, it's going to starve to death. These copper bands like to eat invertebrate off of rock. We got to transition it to a world where it wants to eat mysis and it wants to do it aggressively. That is actually a harder process than you think it is. Instead of just being lucky and burning through 10 of them, there's actually ways to do it. And this fish here, we call it, a morosido, like a expert-only fish. But the reality is it's just more sensitive to this carbon or our fiber problem. So just give it more fiber. It turns out it's a really easy fish. It's that simple. You just don't treat them all the same. This fish, sifts, sand out of the rocks, or sifts food out of the sand. You need the right size particle sand, and you need the food in there. Sometimes you get them to go eat something else, but these fish are known to not do very well if you can't transition them. You know, the purple queen anthias, different than most anthias, they will only eat live stuff for the most part when you get them, unless you get super duper lucky. You know what Elliot did for me is he just fed them baby brine shrimp. He hatched them and then put a little bit of pellet food in there, you know, every other day, and eventually just transitioned them to pellet food. They just needed to learn. You know, they didn't know. You just plucked them out of the ocean, drop them in your tank, and hope everything was going to go well. It just didn't. And it's amazing actually how well that goes for so many fish, but this one it doesn't. And this one, I mean, it's like it's hard coded in its DNA to eat parasites. Even the other fish's DNA knows that you are here to eat my parasites. That's all it does. So this is a really hard fish to be successful with, you know, in the home environment. So my solution to this is just PE mysis, you know, for all of your kind of carnivores. Super simple. It's hard to overfeed because it's actually mostly water in there, so you feel like you're feeding a lot, but you're not really. It's low phosphate to protein ratio. You know, so it's way, way, way lower in phosphate than it is to protein and nitrogen, meaning that, you know, when you feed this, you're less likely to have a phosphate problem going on. And P is cleaner, fresher, and higher nutritional content. In fact, you can see like brands like Hikari have two different versions of mysis. There's one Canadian one, and then there's some other one. The Canadian one is way more nutritionally dense than the other one, right? I don't even know where the other one comes from, but the Canadian one's the right one. But you can also open these things, and like some of them are freezer burned, some of them actually smell. The stuff from PE is always well cared for, and that's why I would use this one. Seaweed Extreme for the herbivores. Now you can certainly put nori in their tank. I wouldn't do that personally because I want to keep my hands out of the tank. I don't think I want whatever's in the tank on my hands. You know, there's lots of bacteria and stuff in there. I got little cuts on my hands. Every time I'm putting my hand in there, it's not good for me. And on top of that, I don't think the fish and coral want whatever's in my hand in the tank. So I just like feeding these little pellets. They're 67% seaweed. And they also happen to be able to put on a feeder. So I can put fiber throughout the entire day in a really easy manner. And frozen calanus for planktivores. Again, it's mostly water. It's hard to overfeed versus all the powdered foods. If you are really aggressive on your filtration, you know, for me, I had all of those purple queens and the Avanci anthias, and I needed to do it. And I had smaller size TDO and an auto feeder, but holy cow, did I have a lot of filtration on that tank. You know, so I mean, we had everything known to man because we were feeding this every other hour. You know, it was like 4 or 5 times a day. All right, flow. One more interesting ones. This one here, you can look at those little coral polyps and you're like, oh, aren't they pretty? Yeah, that's the animal, man. It's a really complex animal if you start looking at it. And flow is responsible for nearly every biological function inside of that animal. Nutritive delivery, meaning that the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the amino acids, the carbohydrates, the fatty acids, all being delivered to that animal via flow, and it has to do it at the right rate to break through the boundary layer and get to the actual tissue. Prey delivery, the flow is delivering it to it. The element delivery, the calcium, the alkalinity, all the trace elements are being delivered. The gas exchange, it's helping to get rid of excess gases, and it's also getting new gases. All right, for that reason, corals grow into the best biology. And so when you look at this, the coral will actually grow towards that pump. And the reason that it's growing towards that pump is because on this side of that coral, it's getting the most nutrition, it's getting rid of the most gases, it's getting the gases that it needs, and it's getting all the amino acids and everything that's in the water. So of course it's going to grow towards that, and this part over here is just not going to grow as well. That's the nature of it. Once you see this in your tank and you go look at it, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere in your tank, it's in everyone's tank. All right, but how the water returns is just as important as how it's emitted. You know, we all go monkey around with our, you know, power heads, and we aim them here and there, or whatever, and we all got that down. But think about it a little bit more, like what happens like when that water has to return to it? How can I intentionally use flow to be able to get back into that pump and drive it in different areas? And one of the things you'll notice is even though that was a pretty current pump or flow, it's random here, not random, but turbulent. You know, it's turbulent once it hits a surface. So it actually changes even though it wasn't turbulent per se, like in front of it. All right, so it's going right, the corals base out, they grow uniformly, and they're unhindered by their neighbor's growth. In this tank, it's just 2 gyres. There's one gyre that's just dragging all the water going this way, and then that ends, it just drags it all the other way, and then once in a while they're both on, and then it shoots downward. You know what? And this coral is growing all over this place, and there's one exception, right in the middle there. That is where it's the hardest possible place to get the flow using those 2 methods. I gotta go get another pump and aim it there, and all of a sudden those corals would grow too. But man, I'd have a lot of more pumps in my tank, and I don't necessarily want that. So one of the options is you can take the corals right out of there and just move them. All right. So when it's going wrong, One side coral, the coral just grows faster. You can see it here again. Coral's growing towards the best biology, that pump. And on the other side where that arrow is, it's just not growing as fast. But what you might not see until you take a closer look is that little one there isn't growing because it's on the wrong side of that coral. So not only is that coral, not growing well, of course the one on the other side of it's getting blocked and it has the worst biology as well. But you know what? In really stagnant areas, you start to get tissue loss. Sometimes you'll see it actually on the whole coral, but sometimes you just see it in the inner working of the coral. The coral itself is stopping, and especially in the center of the tank where it's the hardest. All right, so I've had the best success with long sustained flushing currents. I like the gyre just because you can mount it really high and it shoots across and it has a high velocity of water, but you can do this with any pump. It's just whether or not you're going to get a little bubble sucked in the top of it, or whether or not you're going to put it down a little bit lower. But I like strong sustained currents instead of 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and little pulses of this and that. I want to create a current in the tank that drags water over the surfaces and creates a different type of flow. The aquascape should be designed with flow in mind. This isn't the best example, but you can see that we've moved the rock off of the back of the tank. Water flow can go behind it, which means not only can it shoot behind it, but when they intersect, it'll push water through all of those little sections and flow through what would normally have been dead spots. But this is probably, if you're an acro lover, this boring aquascape is probably even a better option because this looks boring right now, but once you cover it in acros and they grow out, well, you might not be able to see it, but there's two pumps on the front of this thing. They're cride and flow in the front, but in the back, there's two gyres that are vertical shooting across the back. And so as those things shift, you're gonna see water flushing through basically every surface of this thing, and you're gonna see those nice uniform color or growth patterns that you like and see in all those Tank of the Monk photos. All right, and the best solutions for me are simply just not seen or heard. The best advice I could tell you in most cases is every one of these manufacturers loves to put these pumps, they want to post the largest possible gallon per hour number on there. They tend to do it in a way that makes them a little noisy. So if you just turn the thing down to 90%, in a vast majority of cases you can't hear them anymore. But as in, you feel like you got cheated. But in reality, I just wish they would not, the 100% was the 90 and they would never have that problem. It's up to you. But I like in this case that peninsula. We had the gyres lying sideways and we're just shooting down the edge of the tank, creating a gyre going around this way. So best solutions are not seen or heard. And clean them bi-monthly for longevity of performance. Who here just cleans them whenever they stop working almost? Oh, just a few. Bravo. So you should actually clean these things. The best way to do it is just get a bucket of citric acid and leave a little bit of slack for yourself and then put the pump in there while it's running. It will clean itself in the next hour, jump it in. And not only will you get longevity out of the pump and you won't waste all of your money, but also the pump will actually perform and grow the corals better as well, getting your money out of the thing that you bought. All right, filtration now. All right, filters are not necessary. Most just reduce reliance on dilution, water changes, and work. So if water changes are working, the only thing you'd buy a filter for is because, what? I guess I want to, not do water changes as much and hopefully this tool is gonna help me do that, or because water changes aren't working. But they're all trying to remove nutrient pollution, yellow pigments, odors, and accumulative toxins or contaminants, right? So all of this stuff is trying to do one of those things. They're totally unnecessary. I showed you the E170. We didn't have any of this stuff on there. You can do it without that. Doesn't mean that they're not nice in some cases or necessary, but think about it. Also, dirty is synonymous with uncared for. So I don't know, we've all heard at some point in time that corals like dirty water. That is absolutely untrue. That is uncared for water. They might like, water that are nutrient rich, but not dirty, polluted water. Nobody likes that. And often, in most of the cases, not all, but most of the cases when I hear that statement of corals like dirty water, almost universally it's an LPS tank. But often also, it's an example of a tank where it's an example of what lived, not what died, didn't die rather than what lived. Which means that there were 80 corals in there to begin with and there's only 20 left and they just happen to be the ones that are bulletproof. Now they're big and they're beautiful now, but if you looked at the early shot of this, man, there was a whole lot more in there that did not make it through this dirty tank. So think about that for a little bit. And nitrate and phosphate are just general water indicators for what you can't or don't test for. So you're testing for nitrate and phosphate, you're thinking I'm testing for nutrients, but there's all kinds of other things that are in that food, even especially the like artificial foods and like pellets, but also even some of the more natural ones. There's other things in there that the fish ate and didn't utilize all of, and it goes in the water. And so these are just kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's just giving you a general pulse. So if you have high nitrate and phosphate, you probably have high pollutants in the tank. You have probably a whole bunch of different things wrong in the tank. All right. So when it's going right, tank should look like this, right? Brilliant color, minimal algae, and the tank is a result of what lived rather than what didn't die. Like the reason that those corals are so beautiful is because it's as low zooxanthellae count. Not like we artificially lowered it. It's just like zooxanthellae is brown. And so if it's super high, man, you're not going to get through all of the fluorescent proteins and it's muddy it and make it look down. Also, what's happening here is this is a result, I believe, well, you don't see any algae and stuff in here, but also, I don't know this for a fact because I haven't met this person's tank, but it does not look like somebody is killing a whole lot of coral. It looks like somebody knows what they're doing, so they're probably not just like cycling through coral to figure out what lived. All right. Note that they shared that their nitrate goal is 1 to 3 parts per million, their phosphate 0.04 to 0.8. Note that that's a range. Like never try to peg it because that's just like chasing numbers. There's got to be some range that you're in. This happens to be theirs. And it's low nitrate and it fits why your nitrate and phosphate and what kind of fits why this is so colorful as well. All right, so when it's going wrong though, you're gonna get brown corals. Again, one of the reasons is because I got so much nitrogen and phosphorus in there that I'm increasing the zooxanthellae count, making them look brown. But also, I don't really know why this is, but stressed corals in polluted water just tend to like lose their fluorescent pigments. They just end up being brown. I don't know why that is. And I'm not talking like brown under like, 10K light because all the corals are brown in that case. I'm talking about under your fluorescent lights. But also water quality, causes pest challenges. This isn't as big of an issue as it used to be. Because we got all kinds of animals now. We better understand how to use the utilitarian fish and crabs and tangang and whatnot. But if you happen to have high nitrate and phosphate and you have algae, man, for sure that's what you're looking at. More likely though, it's just a missed dream, struggling coral or random mortalities. The water that these animals live in is its atmosphere. If the atmosphere is poor, well, don't be surprised when you miss the dream, struggling coral, or have random mortalities. It's just, like things just kick the bucket when the atmosphere is poor. So these are the things when you look for the intersection. I happen to have this problem and I know my water quality isn't good. That's probably the first place you should go look. All right, so my solution to this is on all tanks, just avoid perpetually rising nutrients. This is the bellwether. It's not just nitrate and phosphate, everything else that goes with it. I just don't care. I just test it once a month, and I just really don't want it to be worse than it was last month. Start there. That's a great skill set to have. Right after that, though, pick a range. My range that I suggest is 0.5 to 0.15 phosphate and 0.25 to 4.5 nitrate. This is a super easy range to live in. You can absolutely do this. If you want to go higher and pick a different range, man, feel free, but pick a range. I suggest this one. All right, small tanks, water changes only, no filtration. Don't go buy all that stuff. It's just a waste of time and waste of money because you could go here and just take a little pinch grip, scoop up a gallon of water, dump in the trash, in the sink rather, scoop up a bucket of water or a pinch grip of water out of your bucket, dump it in. This is like, what, a 60-second water change? If you did that once a week, that's all you need, done. Like this tank is gonna thrive. I watched Dave here do it on his desk tank forever. All right, you know what? Larger tanks though, you're gonna do water changes, and I'm gonna do 1.5% daily, 10% weekly, or 35% monthly. Don't really care which one of those things that you're going to do. You can automate it if you can, or at least make it easier. One of the easiest ways to make it easier is on your siphon. Instead of just waiting 15 minutes for it to slowly siphon it all, go get the biggest pump that you want, put it on there, and all the water comes out of it inside of 1 minute, and your water change just got a whole lot easier, meaning you're way more likely to do it. Now the refugium and the scrubber. If the water changes no longer work, these are now progressive things that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do a refugium or a scrubber. And the reason I'm gonna use a refugium is because it just works for me so many times. It has so few downsides to it. It sucks out the carbon dioxide, raises the pH, pulls out the nitrogen, phosphorus. Presumably it'll actually bioaccumulate some other toxins. And it's just so easy to do. and it has really no other effects on it. I'm not affecting the food. In fact, it's believed that the thing is actually the chaetomorph is going to leach carbohydrates and stuff into the water and add food. All right, the one thing is, way back in the time, and we tested this horticulture light, which has this big giant red peak on it, and it outperformed some of the lower par options. Recently, in the last year, we tested the Tuna Sun, which is like a full spectrum light, and it grossly outperformed the Refugium lights. This is what I would use now. I wanted to make sure that we weren't leading you wrong, so we started the test over, repeated it again, and it had the exact same result. Not only are you pulling out more nitrogen and phosphorus, not only are you getting less of or higher pH, but also it's less struggling trying to get it to adapt to that weird spectrum on the bottom early on. If I had to guess why that one struggles for some people and their chaeto kind of turns to mush, is their specific strain of chaeto happens to not like that giant peak of red. That would be my guess. I don't know, but I do know that in all of our experiments, the Suns now really outperform the rest. And I don't think you need just the Sun. I'm just saying like a full spectrum light, choose your own adventure on that one. Skimmer. Now, the skimmer here is what I'd implement after this. And the reason being is a skimmer is going to pull out dissolved organics, which is essentially coral food. Now that sounds bad, but the only reason that it's bad is because nitrogen and phosphorus are building up in your tank. You're putting more food than the corals are willing to eat, and it's building up now as pollution. Now I want to remove the excess. The protein skimmer is a great option to do that with. The next one would be the Felton filter sock. If still, the corals want to eat all that food, but whatever, like if feeding too much of this food and it's like building up in terms of organic waste or nutritive waste, well, then I'm going to pull it out with the sock and the filter socks. These things are in progression. After that, carbon dosing. Now, the only reason that carbon dosing is after any of the rest of those is because it's the one that I have the least experience with. It has the most moving parts. Getting the right dose of this is hard. Nobody really knows what the effects of overdosing it are. It's a little bit more murky. It absolutely works, but there's murk here that it just isn't the first thing I would do. If I was still having problems over here, I would do it personally, and that's why it's on this list. Carbon or in a sock, sea chase shark if you want your water's yellow or it smells. I used to use reactors for this, and the tubes and all this stuff. You know what? If you put it in a sock and you put it in between the baffles in your sump, water's flowing over and around it. Just make sure you're not clogging the baffle. That would cause a flood or whatever. But that sea chase shark too, that thing's like this small, super easy. It's magnetically coupled. You can pull the little thing off, bring it to the sink. It's just this little cube, super easy. That's why I'd use that. All right, again, phosphate is an ongoing issue when nitrate isn't. I do change my food. The first food I would try is pH mysis from whatever I was using. I'd switch to this one. And then I'd switch to, after that wasn't working, I'd go to GFO. And after that, I'd go to lanthanum chloride-based solutions like phosphate E. And the only reason that phosphate E is coming after GFO is simply because I've had the most experience with GFO. And I want to recommend the things that I know work the best to all of you. And so the lanthanum chloride actually is something that the Worldwide Corals team uses. The cool part about that is it's more predictable. If you dose 20% or 20 milliliters of this stuff and it has, lowers the phosphate this amount, it's probably going to do that every single time you dose the 20 milliliters. So it's way, way more predictable than the GFO, which is kind of indiscriminate. Just going to strip it all out. So it's kind of debatable, but I have to recommend the ones that I've used the most and understand the most, but know this. All right, making salt water. So salt water is like what are the two things you need for a saltwater tank? Tank and salt water. It's an important piece of this whole thing. Okay, so new salt water should be similar to the tank water, but better. That's a core principle here, right? I don't want to make it worse. So if the calcium alkalinity and magnesium should be pretty close to what's in the tank, or effectively when I do a water change, I'm going to make it worse, right? Okay, same thing with the phosphorus, silica, and nitrate. If those things are really elevated, then when I do a water change, it'll make my problem worse, not better. That doesn't make any sense. And then the same thing with chlorine or even copper. And all these things, there's way more of it in the water than you think. Like that one down there, this was just 6 local water supplies that we tested around Minneapolis. And one of them was 0.5 parts per million copper in the tap water. That's definitely gonna make my water worse if I use that. And also, assuming that you're starting with nothing is the only way a salt manufacturer can make a salt mix. This is one of the things that was just totally lost to me until I had an aha moment, it was probably a year or two ago. When we went and actually mixed up salt around town, we mixed some up with RDI water. I think it was Tropic Marin Pro Reef, and it was 440 calcium, almost 7 alkalinity, and 1350 magnesium. But Dave here mixed it up with his water, and it was 24 DKH. You know why? Because his water has 17 DKH of alkalinity coming out of the tap. And Randy's water was even worse at 26. And these are total opposite sides of town. So like, how could a salt manufacturer possibly make a salt if he doesn't assume you're at zero? So this is one of those goofy things where people used to ask me, like, why are you stripping out all the calcium and alkalinity only to add it back in? It's because, dude, you wouldn't be able to make the right levels if you didn't strip it out, because it might work for you if your water is super duper pure, but it won't work for the whole other side of the room. And a salt manufacturer needs to make it work for everybody. But also it's true of the like ammonia, phosphate, nitrate. At BRS, the nitrate was 5.4. I want to start with that in my freshly mixed salt water. Dave's water, 1.8 parts per million phosphate. I mean, a lot of people are looking for 0.005 or scratch 10. I mean, this is like so grossly different than that. Who would ever want to do that? Brent's water and BRS water is 0.75 or 0.77 ammonia in the water. This is toxic. I would never want to use that. All right. So also, formulation that matches your tanks provides better results than DIY in formulation. These salt manufacturers put a lot of effort in trying to figure out how to mix this stuff, and they don't really want us like going after a plain man scientist trying to fix it. So in this case, the Niosalt, alkalinity 8.5, calcium 435, magnesium 1350. It's in green because those are so close to the parameters that I want to keep. This is a good salt option for me simply on the basis that I don't have to go mad scientist and try to fix it later. Whereas, the Coral Pro salt here, I'm trying to shoot for an alkalinity of 9. It's 11.5. I can't fix that. I can't make the alkalinity less. So this just isn't a good option for me. But it is a good option for somebody who wants to maintain an alkalinity of 11.5 in their reef tank. Similar to that though is Pro Reef, alkalinity 7. Now this one is fixable. I could add a little baking soda or soda ash or something to the water, or even just mixed up 2-part, and I could bring it back up to 9 using a calculator or something. But like, if they all remain the same, why don't I just pick the one that matches my tank water already? All right. So water changes, if it's going right, have no material change on primary elements, limit trace element swings, and they dilute pollutants. Fresh water that makes things worse, not better. Hard to identify health issues and mortality is when it's going wrong. And this is my solution for it. Use a 5-stage RDI. 2 carbon blocks is way better than 1 because these things are not 100% efficient. Probably use one for chloramines because almost everybody has them now. Tropic Min Pro Reef, I'm gonna recommend for you. And the reason I'm gonna recommend that for you is because of what I've used on 50 some tanks for a very, very long time. But for me, I'm gonna be the guinea pig and I'm gonna try this Nios because I wanna use it because it matches my tank water better. And I happen to know the systems and processes they use to produce their salt, and I believe in it. So when I set up a tank at home, man, I'm gonna be the guinea pig, I'll let you know. If you wanna do it, know you're a guinea pig, you can join the bunch. Adjust the alkalinity because it's the least mad scientist of the 3. When I say the least mad scientist, because when you adjust the alkalinity, it's probably like, I don't know, 100 milliliters or something in there, where if I need to adjust the magnesium, it's a major change. I gotta add like, 6 cups of magnesium to adjust it. I'm gonna raise the salinity, then I'm gonna reduce the salinity, which is great, magnesium solid, but everything else just fell through the floor. So I don't wanna do that. All right. And a white container big enough to make a month's worth of salt at a time. You don't want to make salt, go through the process of mixing it up every month. And I want to use a salt like one of these that can store for a while. And so these white Bruce trash cans work really well. There's 20-gallon sizes, 30, 50-gallon sizes. I like white here specifically because I can see the trash in the bottom. So when all that garbage accumulates in there, I know that I should clean it. When it was gray and I was using one of those in a dark basement, I didn't know it, man, until like the water coming out the other side is just, crummy, especially when the pump stirred it up. All right, but also if you're really lucky and you got the space, these kind of things are cool. This is 200 gallons. What 200 gallons allows you to do is mix up a whole gallon, bucket of salt at one time. And not just like when you used every last drop of it, you can still have 40 gallons in here and still mix up the whole thing. And I suggest this one specifically because it's 30 inches wide. and it fits through a door in your house, which is something you don't think about until you need to, and you bought too big a one, and you're like, why doesn't this fit? You need to pound out the little pins on the door, but that's super easy. That's 50-50 whether or not you have to do it, but I really love those things. All right, elements and pH here. All right, everybody here, every reefer would tell you that calcium alkalinity is obvious and easy. Every marine biologist would tell you that trace elements are obvious and easy. We went through that in the last episode. pH is a primary control at the rate at which these elements come together and the strength of structure. This is a really long conversation, but pH regulates the speed at which these things calcify. The pH allows it to find each other. It also stops it from eating holes in itself. Happens in nature, happens in our tank, happened in all of our investigates. It's absolutely true. So elements and pH, when it's going right, when this is done right, the corals and coralline algae grow rapidly. Its skeleton is dense and strong. All right, so what does grow rapidly look like? 2 months looks like that. 6 months, you're gonna start to see promise. And then in 12 months, it should start to look like the goal. Now, I won't tell you that I think that this is actually the current norm, but I do think it could be the new norm. We just start to have to adapt this stuff. It isn't just the elements. I'm talking about we're gonna do everything right here. If we do everything right, that is what the result is. All right, the corals snap at the slightest touch. The growth is abnormally slow. There's a problem worth solving. So, 1350 magnesium, 440 calcium, 9 DKH. Those are actually the test kits that I would use based on our experiments, deciding which ones were both most consistent and we felt were most accurate. BRS Bulk Pharma, Tropic Marine Balling Method on any dosing pump. So what that is just the bulk pharma that you mix together, super inexpensive. And then for trace elements, they have Tropic Marine A and K. We added in there. And the reason I say this is because it worked on the E170. If it worked on the E170 where there's almost more coral in there than water, well, dude, this is a good, solid system. It also happens to be really inexpensive. So if it's inexpensive and it works at this scale, this is the right solution for me. Trace K goes in the calcium. You can use, Tropic Marine suggests between 0 and 330 milliliters into that bucket with the calcium. Now 330 milliliters would mean that like I got a ton of coral in here, and I'm really robust coral. I'm adding a ton of trace elements. If I don't have any coral in here, I'm probably not going to add those things in because that can also feed pests in the tank. So that's what they would suggest. A is about the same thing. All right, water changes to limit swings and inevitable errors. So the water changes we talked about in episode 1, go watch that in length because there's a whole big chunk about it. The water changes are going to solve all kinds of problems in this tank as well. And then to solve the pH, the refugium and soda ash is going to solve it in the vast majority of cases. So the refugium under is going to suck up the excess carbon dioxide, and the soda ash is going to release it as well, and then all these other options. Note that the other options after this go from green to less green to red. To me, this is just the way that I would implement them based on cost, complexity, and like potential for errors and stuff that could come up. You can use any one of them though. All right, lighting. This is my favorite one. This is the most complex, but we're going to learn something new today here. Well, all right, photons produce 90% of the coral's energy needs. So those photons are light radiation emanating from the sun all the way to Earth. And the way that it's working is basically the zooxanthellae is taking that carbon dioxide in the water and using that light radiation to break those molecules apart into their individual components of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they reassemble it back into glucose. What's really happening in that case is we're transforming this radiation energy or light energy and turning it into a stored chemical energy, being a simple sugar, right? So the simple sugar can be used at a later date, and that light energy is momentary right now. All right, 1 par, by the way, coming out of this thing is 602 quadrillion photons per second per square meter. 602 quadrillion photons is 1 single par. It's a whole lot of photons that we're counting here. And this actually down here from Blue Harbor is somebody that went down into the tropics, swam down about 15 feet and started measuring the par. And the par down there for them was about 400 to 500, right? And so consistently 400 to 500 times 602 quadrillion. Okay, you know what? You'd be thinking like, well, why are we doing 300 then? The reality is what they're measuring there is a whole lot of green photons, a whole lot of yellow photons. If we pull those out because we don't use those in reef tanks, it's probably a lot closer to the 300 that we find a lot of success with in reefing. All right, shading. If we're counting photons, man, shading matters. Which of these is getting more of those quadrillions of photons? Which of them is producing more glucose, and which of them is producing more energy? The answer is obvious. We used the steak analogy from earlier. And spectrum mimics spectrum that mimics the sun underwater, matches our understanding of coral biology, will outperform monochromatic spectrums as well. So this again, they took the spectrometer, they went 15 feet down in the tropics, hit the button, and now we know what it looks like down there, which is there's way less red than there is at the surface, and there's actually less violet too, but to a lesser degree. All right, so what does monochromatic mean? Monochromatic means that it's that one little teeny peak of royal blue LEDs. You know, this is the cheapest possible way to do it. It's entry-level LED, but like, does that little monochromatic spectrum look anything like the one that you see down below? Okay, this is what we're trying to get the corals to adapt to. This super duper foreign type of light. Okay, but instead, what we look for is over here. You know, this one has a mix of violet light, it has a mix of indigo light, and that lighter blue light, much more similar to the blue range down there. Now the question you might be asking is like, what about all that green and yellow and stuff? And the answer to that is those things don't actually play a huge role in photosynthesis, and we've found over and over again that they're not necessary to the tank. We can have a really thriving tank without those, and even beyond that, we don't want them because all that green and yellow in there makes the corals look like mud. The entire tank looks brown, you know, and ugly. So we pull those parts out to create the ideal spectrum up there. But also, you know, you can add that stuff in, and so this would be a whiter tank. So this tank right here has those wider blue spectrum of the violet, the indigo, and the light blue, but also adds green, yellow, and red in here to create a wider look in the tank that many of us actually like. And also those colors now. So it's not just fluorescent pigments that we're looking for, there's color pigments. And if your corals have those color pigments, we're gonna be able to bring those out as well. All right. And so I talked about this just a little bit a second ago, but how we get these corals to adapt. But these are the pigments that are absorbing energy, you know, from the sun. They're absorbing the photons. So we have chlorophyll A. This is the primary photosynthetic protein or pigment. And what you see there is predominantly it's soaking up all the violet light. You know, this is the violet end of it. The carotenoids are a wide range of things, but they're taking up a wide range of the blue. And then the chlorophyll C2 is largely just this indigo light that happens to match the same as royal blues. And it's an accessory pigment which adds energy back to chlorophyll A. So this is the message of, you know, has anybody ever had a tank where I start up the lights and the tank like just doesn't do anything, but a year later it, you know, finally takes off? This is what I believe is happening, is in many of those cases, you know, the coral is adapting to this poor light. And by adapting, what I believe that means is it's changing all of the pigment structure. It's getting rid of the unnecessary pigments, and then it's using that limited energy that it has to create new pigments. And only when it has enough energy to create those pigments to make more, collect more, now it can start serving biology needs like growth and stuff. And that's what we're talking about adapting, not just like a, you know, generic term. All right, so when this is going right, LPS and soft corals tend to be actively growing, colorful, fluorescent, puffy, but not inflated balloons or reaching. LPS corals are really easy to kind of see. I might just look at these things and know these things look happy. An SPS coral will expend energy based on the surface, which means when you put that SPS coral on the surface of that rock, you'll know that this was the right move, it's the right place, because it says, this is the right place for me, and it starts to base out in the rock rather than trying to grow towards an area where the biology might be better. And then what you'll also see is they spread laterally. You know, they start to plate out and they start to grow laterally instead of just up. That's also what you'll see. A high power range is often more colorful due to lower zooxanthellae count. So a lot of the corals at the top will actually be more colorful than the ones at the bottom, which often tend to be green. Now some people will tell you that, you know, the paler the coral, the less healthy it is. Sometimes that's true. You might be actually harming it. But if that coral is actually growing, what you just have is a really powerfully colorful coral that grows, you know? So there's a differentiation, you have to know what to look for. All right, also lighting. I'm gonna do this in reverse this time. So the corals will actually tell you last. You know, like when you look at them, the animal will tell you, I'm not healthy, I'm losing tissue or whatever it is. The alkalinity tester will tell you today. Meaning if I add the alkalinity, or if I add, like 20% more photo period in my tank, I'm adding 20% more photons, which presumably means I'm creating 20% more glucose, which means that I have 20% more energy to produce skeletal structure and grow, and even amino acids as well. And I've seen it happen that laterally, where we increase the photo period 20% and the alkalinity needs to be up 20%. I've also seen the opposite, where we add too much light and all of a sudden we harmed them and it goes back down. So alkalinity tester will do this, but this is a predictor. If you want to emulate somebody else's success, I can almost ensure success. If I found any one of your tanks that was thriving and I just did what you did, not just like the light that you picked, but I'd also use the settings that you use and everything. I can almost predict success out of this. If I don't have that ability, a par meter is really good. It's a predictive success. If I tune the par to be, between 50 and 150 par for LPS, I can predict success from this. If I tune it between 200 and 350 for SPS, I can predict that it's very likely to be successful here as well. When it's going wrong, LPS corals are shrunken, tissue's pulled back, and it's trying to get away from the light. It's literally trying to shrink up and get as few of these photons as possible. When there's too much, or when it's not enough, they're ballooning. The corals are reaching, trying to get close to the light. Now, the reality is that some people might look at this coral and say, that's the coral I like, but really what you like is an animal that's hungry. It's trying desperately to get to this light. It might thrive for a while, who knows. All right, with an SPS tank, it's different. So most people would say this tank is actually healthy and it looks cool. And I would say it absolutely looks cool. And I've asked a bunch of my peers about this tank specifically. Do you like this tank? And they'll say, I do, but I can't put my thumb on it. Something's wrong here. And this is what's wrong, is they're all growing up. Like, you can now look at it, now that I pointed it out, none of these corals are plating out growing sideways. They're all growing laterally, trying desperately to get to the sun. And you also can see down here, they're not plating out on the surface either. So now you know what to look for. You can look at this and see. Now that's not to say that this is an awesome looking tank, because it certainly is. But what we're trying to do is become veterinarians of our tanks. We're trying to learn the animal's biology and then be able to react to it. So my solution to this is, emulate other people's success and base it on your own success. There isn't one light out there that I'm gonna recommend over any of the other ones, but emulate thriving tanks, not brand choices. So in this case, if you wanted Illumimagics and you wanted this tank right here, it looks like you need 8 of them and you gotta pack them in like a couple inches away from each other. That's the way that I would emulate this. It's not, Jerry told me to use a brand, it's Jerry told me to use this brand and then pack them in 2 inches apart from each other, using the same way that they used them. And bigger is better for the animals, no question. Now, it's not better for visual appearance, because that's not the nicest looking light I've ever seen. But I'm not even looking at the light, man. I'm looking inside the tank. And this is a really inexpensive solution in many cases. All right, but it can also be fill light. For instance, Greg Carroll here asked me, it's like, hey, should I go out and buy a whole brand new bunch of lights? And I'm like, no, dude, just buy a couple of fill lights for the side. And it filled it, and then he thanked me because it saved him a fortune. All right, and they can be tightly packed modules. Nobody's packing these modules every 1 per 2 feet anymore. Those days are over. That was the recommendation we got from the manufacturers. Now they're all putting them an inch or so apart from each other, a couple inches, whatever. But you can go farther. But it's probably, like a foot apart from each other. And that's how we're producing these types of results. And the answer also is wider is just better than narrow. Narrow is part of an artifact of the par wars. We're trying to beat the test and have the highest par at the bottom of this tank as possible. And I can tell you, we did some experiments on these things, and what we found here is when you get that super narrow cone of light, to get an even distribution, we had to raise the thing up, a foot to 14 inches off the tank. But even then, it's really only distributed very well at the bottom. It's not really that well because it's a big cone. But you go to wider angle lights like this one, all of a sudden, the disproportionate or the going too far outside of its sweet spot really doesn't matter anymore. You really install it wherever you want. And part of that is because instead of being a narrow, it's wide. And part of also that means that when you install multiple together, instead of creating these little cones where at the top of the tank the pars are just going to go like this, what's going to happen now with these wide angle lights is they just overlap each other. And it's just this really even blanket of light. Also, you can see how all of them are bouncing around. You get the laser out and you can just see it. But it's not just off the glass. the glass is bouncing the light around, but the sand is bouncing light around, the corals themselves are bouncing light around, the rock is bouncing light around. You know how I know it? It's because I can see it. The light photons are bouncing off the coral to my eyeball. So it's happening everywhere inside this tank, so the wide angle light is absolutely working better. And of course the wide spectrum options will outperform the monochromatic options biologically and visually. So not only will this biologically look better, but also visually I'll get better fluorescence and color representation out of it. And the solutions that I've used, these things have all worked for me. This is like a really important statement here. When somebody tells you what light is the best one, make sure that they have actually produced the desired result using it and they've had experience. The inverse is true too. They tell you they don't like that one. They have to actually have used it and tell you that, and this is what happened when I used it. Now there's some exceptions to this. If it's just total garbage, you can assume, it's not gonna work, but there's not that many of those. And so I did T5s in that one. By the way, that was my first tank. And so, the T5s just worked. It was simple. It was just 8 bulbs. I didn't need a par meter. I don't need spectrum information. I don't need shading information. It was just like somebody telling me how many bulbs do I need for this and which one. Got that answer, off to the races, never really thought about it again. This one actually, the second tank, this one had a variety of different light sources on it, but the one that I liked the most was called the Vertex Illumina. Okay, I think that this light was actually before its time, because back then everybody was after Par Wars and shooting these real narrow lenses on it. And this one just used, bare LEDs with super wide angles on it. And then it spaced the pucks 3-4 inches apart from each other and just blanketed the tank in light. The only thing I'd do different about this one is I probably would have raised it a couple more inches off the surface of the water. This one is just T5s with LEDs in it again. I think it's called the power module. Love this one. And by this point, I've figured out what I like. And I like this T5s, this fill light that's mixed with LEDs. I like the Kessel shimmer. I don't like the Kessel shimmer on its own because it's just a little too much for me. But when I mute it with the fill light, now it really looks good. And the Kessel lights, we have mixed it now with a few different ones. This is the AP9X, but we would later mix it with the 360Xs, which I happen to like a lot better than this just because they don't have the reflectors in them. This one would be the Kessel also. This is the ULM. At this point, we're not using fill light because I want a beginner tank. I just want a bunch of softies and stuff in here, but what we did do is design the aquascape around the fact that we know what light we're gonna use, and so the aquascape is this U shape where the center is open and there's an island, so the light is illuminating the sides of it and reflecting off the sides, and because of that, the light is getting everywhere and we're seeing coral growth over the entire thing with just a single light the size of a quarter. But that was all intentional. All right, this one is the E170. That's with the WWC hybrid method. We're trying to do it in this case cheaper and easier. A version that's simple and stable is just those T5s and the Kessel again. But in this case, you know what? I'm using that aquatic life thing because I don't got a big old hood for it, and the hoods are expensive. But I got to tell you, this is the most successful reef tank that SPS tank that we've ever done. And it was LEDs only. And I sat down with those two guys at the beginning of it. And me and Josh were huge T5 fans. You can see it. I mean, everything I'm using, I'm just using what I find to be successful. And what Josh would say is, I'm super T5 fan too. But what Victor would challenge us both is, all of you guys are using LEDs. It's on us to figure out how to use them and then teach other people how to use them. It's our responsibility, because if we're not going to do it, nobody is. And so, twisted my arm. I did one of them with T5s and Kessels and the other one with LEDs, but we tuned the spectrum. We really thought about it. Originally we had 10 of those little XR15s, but when the super wide angle HEI lenses came out, we switched over to these things. And that tank, nobody could possibly tell me that light is hindering our performance on that tank, and that is the best that we have ever been able to produce. Nowadays, I would tell you that this would be the solution that I would use. This is not the cheapest solution by any means, but it happens to be what I like. It happens to be an elegant, thin, low profile system that goes on the tank. I really like the shimmer on it. If you see it in person, we fine-tuned the hell out of this. It produced the spectrum that we want, and this is what I would do myself. And so the successes of all these individual lessons is not in the individual lessons, but how they're all combined together. So a lot of these lessons you've actually heard before today, but the question is, have you ever actually followed all of them? Because I can't tell you, if you just take little pieces of this and choose your own adventure, I have no idea what the result is. But if you take all the lessons from this and you apply them, I fully believe that we can get to the 80% success rates. It's not just the 10, the choose your own adventure. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And so I ask you guys right now, like, would this hour be valuable on your first day of reefing? And maybe not the first day, but the 30th day, whatever it is. And I got to tell you, it'd certainly be valuable to me because I spent 2 decades collecting this information. I sure wish somebody had told me, but they got to tell it to me with the ferocity that makes me listen. Like this is the right information, and I'm not going to go listen to this like sea of never-ending stuff. It's really hard to have that level of confidence when there's so many different data inputs in all of this. But if it is, then share it and create a new starting point for the next generation. Because if you just said, I wish I would have had this information when I started, you have the opportunity to create that for somebody else. Share this type of information, even this specific video when it comes out, with other people. And there'll be part 3, perfect is the enemy of great, in California, September 7th through 8th, which is when is good good enough? I actually have that half written, and it's going to be good. If you have any questions, thank you for all of your attention. I'll answer them in just a moment.